Welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts, where we aim to encourage and foster discussion, learning, and creating an informed global community. To view this and other interviews in detail, head over to theseer.org, linked in the description. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel for constant updates. Enjoy the episode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. Joining us here today, we are very, very fortunate to have Vannary Kong. Now, Vannary is the founder and president of the US-ASEAN Council, among various other initiatives she started and titles that she has, which I'm sure we're going to learn all about in this interview here. But just to start off with, Vannary, it's very, very nice to have you here today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you asking me to be a part of this despite the major time differences.
Vannary, in terms of the first question I would like to ask you, I gave a super simple overview of who you were. I just gave one title, and I'm sure there's way more to that we can learn from. So can we just get like an overview of essentially what your journey was? What made you want to go into IR? What made you want to go into cybersecurity? Essentially, what did that road look like to stand where you are as of now?
Yes, so that's always a question that I always get asked, and I always enjoy answering it. But I definitely like to say that I have a non-traditional role in IR and cybersecurity. So I'm actually originally from the Midwest, in the United States, from Indianapolis, and growing up not only from just a mixed race background and like a mixed religious background, but in the middle of the United States, that was the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. Was definitely an interesting journey. But my mother and her family they came to the U.S. in '81 from Cambodia, from the genocide of the Khmer Rouge regiment, and my father is African American. So my mom's family practices Theravada Buddhism, and my dad's family, they're Roman Catholic. So it was definitely learning how to code switch and how to be fluid through different cultures and different groups was definitely something I had to learn at a very early age. And then in undergrad, I actually attended Indiana University in the Indianapolis location, just because in the state of Indiana, there's campuses. But from there, I majored in political science and minored in international studies, and it was quite challenging. Being in a state where diversity and inclusion is very slow on being celebrated and being welcomed in. I was one of the only few students of color in my classrooms. And so unfortunately, I was a victim of racial discrimination, a lot of times being called a lot of racial slurs and being told that due to the color of my skin, I was not going to be as successful as my white colleagues. So it was definitely something that I faced from both a gender and an ethnic perspective. And then even just within colorism within the Asian community, being of Cambodian descent versus not going against, but having that racial disparity between a lot of East Asian, even within the Southeast Asian community, was definitely a little bit hard to grapple with. From there, there wasn't really a large international affairs opportunities in Indianapolis. It's more like domestic politics and huge into like the medical field and a lot of engineering and factory jobs. So I definitely had to really utilize my resources. So my first internship was actually the same agency that brought my family to the U.S. So I interned at Catholic Charities, which is under the Catholic Relief Services, taught English and taught U.S. citizenship classes. And then from there, and he's actually the mayor now of Indianapolis, but this was before Joe Hoxton won the election. But I did a couple of political canvassing as well for some political campaigns as well. I did a couple internships. I interned at the International Center where I did business translations, because I do speak Mandarin. It's not as strong as it used to be because I don't use it as much, but I'm definitely utilized that as well. I also worked in the Indiana State House. So I worked in domestic policy within the education system. But at the time, Mike Pence was actually still our governor. So this was before he transitioned on to becoming our vice president under the 45th administration. And I'll always make a joke that his Secret Service used to actually always take my parking spot, and it was so hard to and it gets really cold in Indiana, like our snows get really bad. So it was just awful trying to park and walk and everything. But so I actually didn't intern there very long, because by the time I got onboarded by the time the 2016 elections came, I actually lost my internship because a new administration came in. From there, I actually got an internship with the United Nations headquarters in New York. But even before that internship, I did a couple of grassroots level organizations where we would bridge together community and the arts, and trying to clean up the neighborhood to fight against and trying to increase the collaboration between the community and the local political leaders as well. So I interned in New York, and unfortunately, well, I wouldn't even say unfortunately, for those that are interested in IR, don't be afraid to actually follow your dreams, because during the time where I did intern for the Indiana state government, it was actually a time where I was actually homeless. I didn't really have a lot of family support, or even just from my university as well. I just kind of had to follow my own dreams and follow my own heart. So by the time I interned at the UN, I was able to network my way and find a way to get my internship paid for, because as you know, even though you're interning at the United Nations, you're working 40 hours a week, but you still have New York City rent, which tends to be quite expensive. So making sure that I got a scholarship and then did really well. I came back. I didn't want to take on another a job just to pay tuition, because by that point, my parents and I were in a disagreement over what I should have chose as a major. So found a way to pay for it, finished off. And then in the meantime, I was actually doing AmeriCorps, this program called AmeriCorps, for 6 months. And AmeriCorps is basically the US domestic version of Peace Corps. Worked that for 6 months. Then I actually met an associate dean at Harvard University who actually recruited me for their PhD law program. But because of how my graduation and my final, the timelines wouldn't have matched up. So I ended up just doing kind of a part-time program at the extension school at Harvard University, and then working, being able to actually get a job here in DC at the cybersecurity firm that I'm at right now. So they actually pay my tuition, and then I just am able to work full-time and gain that experience versus taking on loans and being more in debt. So was actually be able to get more job experience in the meantime. But yeah, once I actually was able to move out to DC, on Washington, DC, there was the opportunities just really opened up where I got to be involved within the youth G20 and G7 summits, representing the US and advocating for international trade policies, and advocating for civil societies on a global scale.
Fortunately, you had to face, racial discrimination here and there. What advice do you have to maybe another student on the other end of the world who's feeling the exact same thing, who's currently in high school, as to how they can really cope with that?
Yeah, my advice would be, when you find something that you love and what kind of wakes you up in the morning, don't let the words of others, as hurtful as they are, deter you for what you want to do. And what I had to tell myself as well is, when others are spewing hate and just evilness upon you, that's reflection on themselves and their own insecurities of how their dreams were crushed because they didn't have the courage to pursue it fully because they kept hearing the word no. And just never taking no for the answer, because for every 10 no's, there's always that one person that would actually believe in you and give you the right chance.
How can a student best immerse themselves in the field of IR? And secondly, do you think that everyone, in despite of really what their main area of study is, whether that's IT, architecture, economics, should get involved in IR?
IR is so important because everything is so interconnected. now you have cyber professionals working with policymakers on how to solve issues of the digital divide, where people in remote areas need access so they can go to school and apply for jobs and to get opportunities and fellowships that will push them in the right direction. And I've always said this to everyone, and that's the beauty of diversity in the world that we live in. Everyone comes from a different walk of life, and everyone can bring solutions. There's an example that I actually like to use, and I was just actually talking about this with some other colleagues. But for those students that are of diverse backgrounds that may not have the resources to take a step to participate in the study abroad program, or may not have the opportunity to learn another language, just really look at what's around you and look where you can connect that to, whether it's on YouTube. There's so many apps that you download for free and just learn another language. Now we're in a space where even just listening to music and movies in a different culture can help you practice those, skill sets that you would need to speak the language. And then even from if you're in an environment where it doesn't have a lot of resources, there's so many youth organizations you can join. And then, like I said, then of course, taking study abroad trips, and then even applying to internships in other countries, whether you're applying to the UN in Geneva or in New York City, applying to work for embassies overseas. I know in Australia, there's a lot of great research think tanks that would allow students to come to the US or in other parts of the world. And don't even being afraid to start your own organizations and connecting with other leaders too.
Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. To learn more about Orakui, as well as more information about our upcoming episodes, don't forget to follow our socials for constant updates and education content. Links are always in the description.
To what extent do you agree with the fact that you have to be an extrovert to be a good leader? And secondly, how do you think we can break down this inhibitor that many people have, which is a lack of confidence to actually get involved in these initiatives?
I would say being extroverted definitely plays its own role in leadership, but I also feel that everyone also has room at the table to be a leader. Everyone plays their role. Some leaders are great at public speaking, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of leaders that might be really strong with data and researching. And I think what's also the beauty of networking is meeting with people and seeing where they're strong at and where some weak points at. Not that you're wanting to focus on that, but just coming together and really bringing the best out of each other. Model UN is a great conference, but there's other conferences out there. There's Model WTO, there's Model ASEAN. There's a lot of other, even at the United Nations for the multilateral organizations, the OECD just put out a great opportunity to be involved with the future of work. There's a lot of roles for if you're not as comfortable speaking, where you can create policy proposals to effectively advocate change if you just want to be behind the scenes. The G20 to G7 have wonderful opportunities, and I think it's just finding and creating access for people to making it known that everyone can play a role into shaping our world.
What would be that one thing you would change in the world?
It's kind of like a two-part answer, and one thing that I would change is just removing the barriers that people have that would prevent them from being their best selves. And I know that sounds very cliche, but a lot of times what stops people from achieving their dreams is sometimes there's so many barriers and there's so much depression and so much mental health issues that doesn't get addressed. So mental health is another barrier, or the fact of systematic racism, or the fact of gender inequality, just removing those barriers so to create harmony and peace, but also just allowing people to have access and resources, whether it's promoting the SDGs or giving resources so they can have food, water, and a roof over their head, or access to quality education and job force. I think removing those barriers would something that I would change personally.
How can, as students, we go beyond talking about something and really go forward to enact change about it?
Yes, and something that's also very interesting is when you're battling transnational issues, something as simple as climate change could be something as simple that you can implement in your daily life, like recycling, or advocating for your university to find more green solutions to things. And then from there, you just keep building it on. So I always say start small and then build out within your community. So an issue that I was very passionate about, especially when it comes to the Southeast Asian community in the United States, is a lot of Cambodian Americans, we have the very similar statistics to African Americans where we don't go to college, we don't, it's a lot of gang violence, teenage pregnancies, and sometimes too is just learn. We also need leaders in this space who knows how to connect issues together. When someone hears about gang violence, they think about that as a domestic issue. It's really not. There's so many things that influences it. Even connecting with other leaders, saying what's something that's actionable. Okay, well, I can start implementing green solutions every day. I can write policy proposals to the UN, to other multilateral organizations.
The last question we would like to ask you here in this interview, it's a fairly simple question, and it's the exact same question that we ask literally everyone we've interviewed so far. And essentially what that is if you could just leave the youth with one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice actually be?
So one piece of advice I would say, there's so many that I can give the youth. I've always said that going into IR is a huge investment. So it's actually a two-part. So one part would be make sure that your finances are in order, because sometimes joining these organizations and opportunities that's going to take you to the right path, or even taking an unpaid internship, requires a huge financial responsibility. And from there, once you join these networking opportunities, just make sure you have your elevator pitch down. Make sure you can tell them who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, and where you're expert at. And from there, you'll see where the IR world will definitely take you.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by DeSare, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professionals. You can read more about us at desare.org. And you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.